My name is Lena Moreau, and the day I bought the company that once humiliated my mother was the day my revenge finally began. I was born in the staff quarters of the Hartman Estate, a grand colonial-style mansion perched on the hillside of Napa Valley, California. My mother, Marta Moreau, was the live-in maid for the Hartmans for almost 20 years. I grew up folding linen napkins and polishing silverware, while their daughter, Celeste Hartman, practiced piano in satin slippers 2 rooms over. The Hartmans always told us we were like family, as long as we knew our place. I never forgot my mother crying in the laundry room when she was fired without severance after Celeste accused her of stealing a bracelet she'd misplaced. It turned up weeks later in Celeste's weekend bag, but the damage was done. My mother's name was ruined. We packed our lives into 3 boxes and left through the back gate. That was the last time we ever spoke to any Hartman, until last month. A letter arrived, addressed to my mother, who had passed away 3 years earlier. It was from Edmund Hartman, the family patriarch, and it looked like a last will and testament. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. And what I found inside changed everything. The letter was short, handwritten in elegant script I recognized from the dinner menus my mother used to iron flat before every party. To Marta Moreau, in the event of my passing, you are entitled to the confidential equity clause agreed upon in 2004, 7% ownership of Hartman Vineyards, to be exercised within 90 days of this letter. 7%. At first, I thought it was a joke. Then I noticed the signature and the attached legal document with the firm's seal. I reread the clause 5 times. I remembered my mother once mentioning that Edmund had offered her something for her loyalty years ago. I thought she meant a Christmas bonus or a handwritten thank you note. I had no idea it was this. But here's the twist. If the beneficiary is deceased, the equity could legally pass to the next of kin, me, provided I filed the transfer paperwork before the 90-day expiration. It sounded like a gift from the grave. But to me, it was something else entirely. It was my chance. Not just to reclaim what was owed to my mother, but to step into the very house, the very company that once treated us like we were disposable. The vineyard today. Hartman Vineyards had become a wine empire over the last decade, expanding into international markets and raking in millions annually. But underneath the glossy website and curated Instagram page, I found something interesting in their financial reports: mounting debt, slowed growth, a pending merger, and if I exercised my 7% stake publicly, it could disrupt the entire deal. That's when the idea first began to take shape. What if I didn't just claim the 7% quietly? What if I used it to take control? From design student to strategist, I hadn't lived in Napa in over 10 years. After we left the Hartmans, I'd earned scholarships, worked double shifts through college, and landed a marketing job in San Francisco. I kept my head down, built a name and branding strategy, started a small firm of my own. No one connected Lena Moreau, the consultant, to Marta Moreau, the maid. And that was exactly how I liked it. Until now. I booked a trip to Napa under a pseudonym and scheduled a meeting with Gideon Blake, the Hartman family's corporate lawyer. He didn't recognize me, of course, just assumed I was another aggressive investor sniffing opportunity. He was wrong. I wasn't there to invest. I was there to reclaim, and maybe destroy. It was a crisp Tuesday morning when I arrived at the gates of Hartman Vineyards. I'd worn a sleek black pantsuit, clean lines, high heels, and a sharp clutch. My hair was pulled into a low twist, and my glasses framed my eyes like armor. I wanted to look nothing like the girl who used to mop these floors. The same security guard who used to give me lollipops now opened the gate without a second glance, thinking I was someone important. He wasn't wrong. Inside, I was escorted through a glass-walled corridor that overlooked acres of grapevines. The smell of oak barrels and pressed grapes flooded my senses. But instead of nostalgia, I felt a quiet fire burn in my chest. When I entered the conference room, they were already seated. Celeste Hartman was exactly as I remembered her, polished, cold, calculating, except older now. She wore a white silk blouse, her blonde hair wrapped tight in a chignon. Her smile froze when I introduced myself. Lena Moreau. For a split second, her eyes widened. She remembered. "You're Marta's daughter?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Correct, I replied calmly, placing my folder on the table, and I believe we have some business to discuss. The 7% that ruined their deal. Gideon Blake shifted uncomfortably in his seat as I handed over the notarized transfer documents. He scanned them once, then again, then leaned in toward Celeste and murmured something urgent. What is this? She asked, her eyes narrowing. It's a legally binding clause your father signed in 2004, I said smoothly. 7% equity granted to Lena Moreau, my mother, for her years of service. Since she's deceased, I, as her only child, now hold that stake. Celeste laughed, but it was brittle. You think a servant's daughter can just walk in here and take a slice of this company? No, I said. I think she already did, and now I'm here to make decisions on behalf of that stake. The silence that followed was electric. You shouldn't have opened that letter. Do you realize what you've done? Gideon hissed. We're in the middle of negotiating a buyout. This throws everything into question. Exactly, I replied, leaning forward. Which is why I'm requesting a full audit of Hartman Vineyard's books before any merger proceeds. As a minority shareholder, that's my right. Celeste stood abruptly. You don't belong here. I smiled, slow and deliberate. You're right, I didn't. But now, legally and financially, I do. She stormed out. Gideon followed her, shouting something about delaying the vote. And I sat there, alone in the conference room, watching my reflection in the polished glass wall. I wasn't the maid's daughter anymore. I was a stakeholder, and I had just become the storm they didn't see coming. The audit request sent shockwaves through the vineyard's leadership. Within a week, I received emails from 5 different departments, finance, legal, HR, all scrambling to comply. They thought I would be intimidated by paperwork. They underestimated how well I understood paperwork. Celeste, on the other hand, was silent. No calls, no emails. But I wasn't surprised. She was never one for confrontation. She preferred to let others do her dirty work. So when I was summoned to a casual shareholders' lunch the following Thursday, I already knew it wouldn't be casual. A lunch served cold. The restaurant was one of Napa's most exclusive. White linens, crystal stemware, waiters who never made eye contact unless invited. I walked in early and watched as the rest of the players arrived. Celeste, Gideon, 3 board members whose names I'd memorized from public filings. And finally, Jonathan Wells, the buyer, a venture capitalist known for flipping companies like pancakes. This wasn't lunch. It was a quiet war council. Celeste started sweet as always. Lena, thank you for joining us. We thought it would be helpful to have an open conversation. Of course, I said, folding my napkin carefully. Transparency is important in any partnership. Jonathan leaned in. Let me be candid. We're close to finalizing a deal to acquire Hartman Vineyards, but your sudden entrance complicates things. We'd like to offer you a buyout. He slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside, $2.4 million for my 7%. Not bad for a clause my mother never mentioned. But still not enough, because it wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. This isn't about a number. It's about a name. I looked Jonathan in the eye. I'm not interested in selling. I'm interested in voting. Celeste scoffed. You don't know what you're doing. This isn't your world. No, I said, it's my mother's, and you burned her out of it without hesitation. Celeste's smile cracked for the first time. You really think your mother didn't steal that bracelet? I stared at her, my voice calm but razor-edged. She didn't. You found it in your weekend bag. I remember I was 10. I saw you put it there. The table fell silent. Truth served with Sauvignon Blanc. I stood. I'm not here to rehash history. I'm here because this company was built off the backs of people like my mother, who were treated like footnotes. I pushed the envelope back across the table. I'm keeping my shares, and I'll be attending the next board meeting as a voting shareholder. Then I smiled. And if you proceed with the merger without my consent, I'll file an injunction based on shareholder suppression. Let's see how that looks in the press. Jonathan looked visibly pale. Gideon muttered something about legal exposure. Celeste just glared, her knuckles white around her wine glass. I left without touching my food. Revenge doesn't need seasoning when it's served with truth. The board meeting was set for Monday. Until then, I kept my head down, on the surface. But underneath, I was digging. There was something about the 2004 clause in Edmund's will that didn't sit right with me. Why would a man like Edmund Hartman, calculating, aristocratic, borderline cruel, leave equity to a maid? Even if my mother had served him loyally, this wasn't the kind of gesture he was known for. So I reached out to someone who might know more. Agnes Duval, the Hartmans' former housekeeper. She was the one who helped raise Celeste and had been close to my mother. She now ran a bakery in Petaluma, and when I called, she said, "I've been waiting 10 years for someone to ask about that day." She was Edmund's thing. What you were never supposed to know. We met the next morning over warm croissants and black coffee. Agnes leaned in, eyes serious. "Your mother wasn't just a maid, Lena. She was Edmund's secret, and not in the way you think." I braced myself. They were never romantic. He respected her. In a way, I'd never seen him respect anyone. Your mother helped him out of a massive financial error back in 2003. She discovered an internal theft by the vineyard manager, embezzled over $200,000 through false supplier invoices. "What?" I whispered. "Your mother saw the books. She may not have had a degree, but she had a mind like a steel trap. She saved the company from collapse." I sat in stunned silence. "And in return," Agnes continued, "he offered her two things, to press charges and make her CFO, or keep it quiet and reward her privately. She chose silence. She said it was safer that way, that she didn't want to draw attention." That sounded like my mother, always behind the curtain, always the quiet backbone. Agnes took my hand. "He didn't give her that equity out of guilt. He gave it to her out of debt." Buried beneath bottles and lies. Before I left, Agnes gave me a folded sheet of paper, an old inventory log from the Hartman wine cellar, dated April 14th, 2004. A handwritten note next to one wine label. "MM found discrepancy. Fix by Tuesday or pull records." Initialed EH, Edmund Hartman, the initials, the date, the reference. It wasn't just gossip. There was proof. Proof that my mother had been more than just a maid. She'd been the quiet savior of the very empire they now tried to push me out of. And now I had leverage. I scanned the log, photographed it, and emailed it to Jonathan Wells, the buyer. Subject line, "Before you sign anything." Then I printed a copy to bring to the board meeting. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing. I wouldn't be the one sitting silently in the back anymore. This time, I would be the one at the table, and they would have to listen. The Hartman Vineyard's boardroom looked just as I remembered it. Polished walnut table, leather chairs, oil paintings of vineyards and patriarchs long gone. I used to dust those frames with my mother every Tuesday afternoon. Now I walked in through the front, not the service door. Celeste was already seated at the head of the table, surrounded by her loyalists. Gideon Blake, two board members, and a young woman I didn't recognize, furiously typing minutes into a laptop. When I entered, Celeste didn't smile. She didn't speak. She just nodded, like I was a weather pattern she had no power to stop. Motion to vote. Jonathan Wells joined via video call, his expression unreadable. "We'll begin," Celeste announced, folding her manicured hands. The first item on the agenda, finalizing approval for the merger with Wells Venture Holdings. Majority vote required. "Before we vote," I interrupted, placing a folder in front of each board member, "there's some history I think you should all be aware of." Gideon tried to object, but I kept speaking. "These are copies of internal documents from 2004, confirming that my mother, Lena Moreau, discovered and reported a 6-figure embezzlement within this company. Instead of going public, she quietly saved the business and was granted 7% equity by Edmund Hartman as compensation." Celeste's voice cut in. "This is irrelevant. That equity was hers, not yours." "Incorrect," I said evenly. "Upon her death, it passed to me, as recognized by your own legal counsel." Jonathan leaned toward the camera. "Is this true?" No one answered. So I continued. "This company didn't grow in a vacuum. It was built on the quiet work of people like my mother. And now, when you're facing debt, declining sales, and a desperate merger, you want to sweep that under the rug?" I let the silence hang. "I vote no on the merger." One by one, eyes turned to the rest of the table, and then another no. It was Rachel Kim, the youngest board member. I wasn't comfortable with the numbers, she said quietly. And now with this, I think we should pause. The fallout begins. Celeste looked like she'd been slapped. You think this is noble? She spat. You're burning the house down out of spite. No, I said. I'm rebuilding it with truth. She stood, trembling with rage. You think you belong at this table? You're still the help. I met her gaze, steady and cold. Not anymore. Gideon looked visibly ill. Jonathan disconnected from the call, and just like that, the merger collapsed. I'd just cost Celeste Hartman a $90 million deal, and I wasn't finished yet. Next order of business. There's one more motion I'd like to raise, I said. Everyone turned toward me. I'd like the board to consider the nomination of a new interim chair. A pause. Effective immediately. Celeste laughed, sharp, bitter. Who? She asked. You. No, I replied. I nominate Rachel Kim. The room stirred. Rachel's eyes widened in shock. She's qualified, I continued. She's honest, and this company needs fresh leadership, someone who actually listens. Celeste tried to object, but another board member seconded the motion, and just like that, the vote passed. Celeste Hartman was out. 2 days after the boardroom takedown, I received an unmarked envelope at my hotel. Inside was a single note typed in courier font. You may have won the room, but you haven't earned the name. You're not done yet. See, no return address. No signature. But I didn't need one. Celeste. I expected rage. I didn't expect restraint. And that worried me more. The letter that changed everything. Later that week, I got a call from Diana Fuller, the estate attorney who'd handled Edmund Hartman's personal affairs. She was calm, neutral, almost robotic on the phone. There's something we didn't disclose during probate, she said. Your mother asked us to hold it in case you ever reappeared. I'm listening. It's a letter, written by Edmund, sealed, addressed to you. I drove to her office that afternoon, heart pounding. She handed me the envelope gently, as if it might bite. I opened it with trembling fingers. Lena, if you're reading this, you found your way back. I wasn't a good man. I was a calculating man, but I was never blind. Your mother had more honor in one hand than most men I knew had in their entire bodies. She kept this place alive more than once. I didn't protect her the way I should have, and I let my daughter become something I'm ashamed of. That 7% isn't enough. That's why I set aside a trust in a name only I knew you'd recognize. Find it, and don't let Celeste take it. E.H. I sat back in the chair, stunned. A second trust? The name only I'd know. I racked my brain. What name? What code? Then it hit me. Sunday Sparrow. It was the name of the vineyard blend Edmund and my mother created together in 2003, just after the embezzlement scandal was handled quietly. It was a small batch, never sold, just bottled, labeled, and stored. Like a secret. I drove straight to the estate archives at the vineyard. And there it was, buried in an index ledger under a holding company called Sparrow Hills LLC. Registered discreetly, it controlled 15% of Hartman Vineyards. Hidden, protected, and now, legally mine. The final move. The next shareholder meeting was already scheduled. I walked in this time with 22% voting power. Celeste's face was unreadable. This wasn't about a seat at the table anymore. This was about ownership. I didn't say much, just enough. I invoked my right to review all executive contracts, including Celeste's. When the vote came to review her compensation, 3 board members voted with me. 1 abstained, and she lost her position as executive director. Celeste didn't speak as she gathered her things, but when she passed me, she paused. You've taken everything, she whispered. I hope it was worth it. I looked her in the eye. No, I haven't taken everything, just what my mother was owed. She walked out, slowly, without looking back. After Celeste left, the room sat in stunned silence. No applause, no celebration, just the quiet hum of an air vent and the rustle of resignation packets being slid across the table. I had won, but strangely, it didn't feel like triumph. I'd spent years imagining this moment, reclaiming power, avenging my mother's name, standing where we were never allowed. But standing there now, it felt hollow. Because no boardroom vote, no shareholder title, could bring back the years my mother spent carrying the weight of someone else's legacy on her back. And it couldn't give her the justice she deserved while she was still alive. The visit I'd been avoiding. That weekend, I drove to my mother's grave for the first time since all of this began. The wind rustled through the eucalyptus trees. The sky was that muted kind of California blue. I sat down on the grass, a bottle of Sunday Sparrow in my lap. I placed it by her headstone and whispered, "It was never about the wine or the money. It was about you being seen, and now they finally know." A tear slid down my cheek before I realized it had even formed. I did it, Mom, and I did it without becoming them. Building, not burning. Over the next few weeks, I had a choice. I could dismantle the Hartman brand from the inside, fire people, strip power, rename the vineyard entirely. But I didn't. Instead, I restructured. I created an internal fund for vineyard workers' health and education support. I promoted people who had been stuck in the shadows for years, and I renamed the guest estate where my mother once mopped floors, the Moreau House. Some called it vindictive. I called it memory and legacy. And legacy. An unexpected letter. One afternoon, a handwritten envelope appeared on my office desk. "Lena, I won't ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but I want you to know I saw what you did with the company, and I was wrong. About everything. You didn't destroy us. You made us better. If your mother can hear you, I know she's proud, Celeste." I didn't cry, but I did feel the weight shift, ever so slightly. The beginning of something else. A year after the boardroom vote, I stood on the steps of the Moreau House during our first harvest festival. The vineyard was thriving, profits up, staff turnover down, and most importantly, a new culture rooted in respect. A young intern named Maya approached me with a shy smile. "Miss Moreau, I read your story in Forbes. You make me think maybe people like me could run things someday too." I smiled gently, the same way my mother once did when folding clean linen with me in the kitchen. "You won't just run things, Maya," I said. "You'll build new things no one's ever dared to imagine." Epilogue. Reclaiming doesn't always mean revenge. I learned something unexpected on this journey, that reclaiming isn't always about destroying what hurt you. Sometimes it's about transforming it, reshaping it into something that carries truth, compassion, and strength. My mother never wanted a crown. She just wanted dignity. And now her name was etched into the foundation of a company that once erased her. That was my real inheritance. That was my final victory.